Hello everyone and welcome to the Property Podcast. I'm Rob B and of course with Rob D. And this week, by popular demand, we've got our third wheel back.
Yes, welcome back to the Property Podcast, and welcome back also to Pete Matthew from the Meaningful Money Podcast. He came and slapped us about a bit about our personal finances a few weeks back, and now we've got him here again to broaden our property horizons. So lots to look forward to, because we've also got a news story and a resource that blew Rob Mentz's mind when I showed it to him earlier. But before all that, we're recording this episode a little bit earlier because we've got a couple of bits coming up, Rob.
We have indeed. We've not got one, but actually two summits, back-to-back weekends. Now, we're not mentioning it to say buy a ticket because they sold out months ago. If you don't know what our summits are, you can't buy any right now because we haven't announced our dates for next year, any tickets. But if you're interested to find out just what's happening and what they're all about, go to thepropertyhub.net/summits. However, Rob, while that is exciting, what of course has been probably the main focus for us the last couple of weeks is getting the new website ready, and it finally went live.
Yeah, it did. We're still possibly working through a few of the bugs, so if you're there and you find something that doesn't look quite right, or you click on something that goes nowhere, don't panic, we know about it. We're on the case with ironing out those last little bugs, but hopefully you'll agree that it looks a million times better. And if you haven't been to check it out yet, thepropertyhub.net is the place to go. And while you're there, you can enjoy our new, even easier way of booking yourself onto a meetup. You can do it in a couple of clicks without leaving the site now. So that's just one of the things that we've improved. And meetups, believe it or not, are next week. How is it the end of October already? We don't know how this happened. We were both convinced we were at the start of October, but luckily our team has realised and has organised the meetups, which are happening on the first Thursday in November. So if you haven't been to a meetup before, make this your first one. Thepropertyhub.net/meetups is the place to book.
Now, time for our news story of the week. Now, our government is about to bring in some new tax changes for landlords, for buy-to-let investors. And while our government introduces it, it seems another government, not too far away, has had a go at this already and gone, this is not working, and just chucking it out, which is a little worrying.
Yeah, it is a bit, isn't it? This is a story from The Telegraph, and it's about a policy in Ireland. Now, full disclosure, I didn't even know this was a policy in Ireland, but apparently it is. So in 2009, Ireland was just starting to suffer the effects of its property boom, then bust. And so they brought in a policy that restricted the mortgage interest tax relief that landlords could claim, which, of course, is exactly what's coming in now in the UK. They didn't go as far as the UK is planning to go. They've only cut the relief that could be claimed to 75%. But they've just announced that they're increasing it to 80%, and then they will keep increasing it by 5% a year until it gets back up to where it started before they started messing around with the whole thing and gets up to 100%. Basically, they found out that it doesn't work. And as you quite rightly said, Rob, just as they're deciding it doesn't work, we're bringing it in. So what does this mean? Well, obviously, the two markets are not the same. Just because it hasn't worked and it's been abandoned in one place doesn't mean the same will be true for another. But I think I would be getting a little bit nervous if I was in charge of implementing this and in charge of overall housing policy. And there's a little bit of a ray of hope in there for us as investors, because maybe it means that, well, it probably will be introduced, but maybe it won't go all the way to full implementation in 2020 if they realise before then that it's not working out.
We can only hope. But we'll find out very, very soon, because obviously we're expecting a few announcements from the government. And of course, we'll cover it when that happens. So now, it's time to get our good old friend Pete Matthew back on. Now, he dropped loads of value on our show only a few weeks ago. So when we were looking at what we wanted to talk about, one of the subjects was alternative ways to invest in property. Now, it didn't take us long to think, oh, Pete did such a good job last time. Why not get him back on the show and help us through this topic? Because as you'll see, there's a lot here. There's a lot to cover. And don't worry, we're going to break this episode up a bit and talk about it and interject, because there is so much to take on board. This is like high-level stuff for a lot of people, but I think everyone will learn from it.
Yeah, absolutely. So the context for this is we've dedicated the last 189 episodes to largely talking about how to invest directly in property. So it's fair to say that we've covered that a lot. But we're not too biased to recognise that it's not for everyone. There is hassle when it comes to investing in property. It's not the right choice for some people. But that still doesn't mean that you should necessarily write off the entire property sector. There are alternative ways of getting exposure to property. So that's what this chat was all about. And we started out by asking Pete, what are some of the different types that you can get exposure to property other than owning directly?
Yeah, one of the best inventions of the modern era for those looking to build wealth is the collective investment. So it's where you pool your money with a bunch of other people who want to invest in the same sort of thing, and because you've got then economies of scale and buying power, you can buy much bigger stuff than you could do as an individual, right? So I don't imagine you know many people, you probably do actually, you boys, but you don't know many people who own a shopping centre or a car park. Now, those are commercial properties, they have income streams, but most people couldn't afford to buy one in their own right. But by investing in a pooled investment, you can get access to that sort of thing. The problem is, if you like, and this is where the acronyms come in, is there's at least probably half a dozen different kinds of pooled investment with different benefits. So most people, we're talking about funds, really. If I start to use the word fund from now on, that's what I'm talking about, a sort of collective investment where you share your money with other people and invest corporately. Most people have heard of a unit trust or an OIC. So that's the sort of basic, most commonly available fund, usually where you can buy an OIC or a unit trust which invest in pretty much anything. You can buy these kinds of funds on any platform, Hargreaves Lansdown or Best Invest or whatever. And these can hold physical property in them. You can get property funds. And inside those funds are real physical buildings, office blocks, car parks, shopping centres, things like that. So that's an easy way to do it. There's a version of those called closed-ended funds. Investment trusts is the more common word for those. Investment trusts can do things that OICs and unit trusts can't, so they can borrow money. We call that gearing. Gearing within a fund brings an extra element of risk. Investment trusts are shares. They trade on the stock market, and therefore they can trade at either a discount to what the property inside the fund is actually worth, so you can actually get them cheap, or sometimes they're at a premium, so you can buy at a more expensive rate than the underlying property would actually justify. We're getting to the deep end of the complexity pool here, but the point is to say that there are different kinds, really. You can get REITs, that's real estate investment trusts. They're a special kind of property investment trust, as is something called a PAIF, PAIF, a property authorized investment trust. There are some tax benefits for those. Specifically with those PAIFs, they're quite a recent development, 2007 and 8, I think. All the tax is on the investor, not the fund. So if you're going to hold one of those within a pension or an ISA, they're essentially tax-free. So that's quite a useful thing.
Okay, so I'll just cut back in here. Pete's been talking about 3 different structures, all of which you could broadly call collective investments. So you end up basically owning a small share of a commercial portfolio. So the fund, however it's structured, owns commercial property, and you have a little piece of that. And that's wrapped up in different ways, which has different tax pros and cons. So the acronyms might be confusing, but as a concept itself, it's quite easy to understand. And this is the most common way of getting exposure to property without actually owning it yourself. And this is commercial property, remember, rather than residential. But these aren't the only ways. Pete then went on to talk about other ways to get exposure to property by investing in vehicles that don't actually own property directly themselves.
One, I think, really important way to invest in property, which probably a lot of your listeners have not come across, is something called an ETF. Now, an ETF stands for an exchange-traded fund, and it's kind of a hybrid between a share and a fund, and it essentially tracks a market. All right, so there are indices. You know, you've got, I'm sure you guys report on different property indexes or indices, which track the sort of general value of property, either here in the UK or global property or emerging market property. And so you can get access to property by tracking those indices. They're super cheap. Usually ETFs, they cost you next to nothing to buy and own. So they're a great way of getting access to the property market. But they don't actually hold, usually anyway, they don't actually hold any direct property. They're holding financial derivatives and complex financial instruments. So you need to know what you're getting into before you buy something like that. But they have clear benefits because they're super cheap and you can hold them in an ISA and stuff like that. So all kinds of ways of accessing property, folks, but not in the traditional way that most people know about.
This all sounds really interesting. So next we wanted from Pete, what are the pros and what are the cons to alternative methods of investing? So Pete started by talking about how it's a way of avoiding the tax implications of actually holding a property directly.
So if you were to buy, say, a property fund, you don't have to worry about stamp duty, or at least not at the rate that you do if you're going to buy a property. Much lower rate of stamp duty, and in certain forms of those funds, you don't pay any stamp duty at all. If you buy a fund and it owns properties and the fund itself decides to buy and sell properties, you don't have any capital gains issues. You might do when you sell your shares in that fund, but when the individual property is sold within the fund, you don't have to worry about CGT. It's arguably a slightly different asset class. Usually you'd be investing in commercial property rather than residential. Commercial property is a different animal, but as such, it can complement what you're doing in the residential space. So those are the obvious benefits, really. Property funds are not perfect. Since the Brexit vote, some property funds have actually put what's called a moratorium on withdrawals, which means you can request your money out now, but you won't get it for 6 months. So it's still fairly liquid, but not as liquid as it should be normally. Most property funds hold a good amount of cash so that they can cover any withdrawals. But if there is a lot of withdrawals, and you guys know there's a real sort of, to my mind, knee-jerk concern about the property market after the Brexit vote, which seems to have sort of leveled out a bit now. But in response to that, a lot of people wanted to pull their money out of property funds, and that caused a problem. There's always costs involved with any fund. There's annual management costs, and if you hold it on a platform, there's costs there as well. So you need to weigh that against the costs of owning property directly. My sort of biggest issue really with property funds is that because it's commercial property and very often it's hard to get comparables, I think the valuations of those things can be pretty subjective. And they're fine while everything is moseying on nicely. But if there's ever some concern about the commercial property world, you can see real sharp declines in the value of the property funds because they're usually valued quarterly. They will get multiple valuations, but it's all a bit subjective. Whereas, of course, if you've got something which is very liquid, like a share, they're traded every second of the day. And so the price is the real price at that time. So pros and cons, it's an alternative to direct property investing and, some benefits and some disadvantages.
So great. We've talked plenty about the tax implications of holding property directly, and investing through one of these other vehicles is a way of swerving that. But as Pete quite rightly says, there are kind of structural concerns with how some of these investments are set up. And it can be hard to get visibility, especially if you're a control freak like us, into exactly what it is that's going on inside one of these vehicles. So with that in mind, I wanted to know, how do you decide what funds to hold?
Any fund will produce a prospectus every year and an annual report. It's the sort of thing you get in the post and never ever read, right? But needless to say, I'm big on people taking responsibility for their own wealth creation. So if you get that sort of stuff and don't at least look at it, then you're arguably a little bit negligent in your own wealth building. So yes, you should find out what is actually owned by the property fund that you're looking to invest in. Does it sound like the sort of stuff that you might want to be involved with? It might not be massively interesting owning half a dozen car parks, but look at the yield stream. Is it a rising yield? Look at all the reasons why you might make a good decision on an individual residential property and try and translate that thinking process to what's underneath a property fund. You won't have any input into what the fund buys and sells. That's what the fund manager does. Essentially, you're paying him or her to make those decisions for you. But have a look and see if it's the sort of thing that you might want to get involved in. Bearing in mind, I think we should always keep our own limitations front of mind as well, and not consider ourselves star property investors just because we've had a couple of good buy-to-lets. That doesn't automatically mean that you're going to be a world-class owner of commercial property.
So a huge thank you to Pete Matthew for coming on the show not once but twice. Great guy. And a great guy with loads of knowledge, as you can tell. If you want to tap into his mind a little bit more, you'll be pleased to know there's a great place to go and find out more about what Pete Matthew does and all the subjects he talks about. We've obviously centered this around property, but there's so much more to personal finance, and you can learn from Pete on his website, Meaningful Money. So go and check meaningfulmoney.tv and, of course, the Meaningful Money podcast. And if you do end up over there, say hi and let them know how you found him. Now, we're pleased, Rob, that many people have found us because they give us nice reviews, which we'll come to shortly. And then we've got a cracking resource of the week. And as Rob said, it did freak me out, this one, a little bit. And we'll let you know what's coming up next week. So before we get to that, though, let's please thank and appreciate this wonderful human being. I like this one, Rob, because Karen starts with, I wanted to leave another review.
That's a good start.
It is. And she says, I invested in some properties about 18 months ago and haven't done any investing since. But as I'm getting back into property investing again and needing to motivate myself, Rob and Rob's podcasts are so informative, to the point, and strip things right back for amateurs. Thank you. I really enjoy it and take something away from every episode. Well, Karen, I think you're a bit hard on yourself calling yourself an amateur if you've started. You probably know a lot more than you think, but thank you for not one, but 2 reviews. So we've had Pete Matthew on twice, and Karen's left us 2 reviews. I'm not sure which one I'm happier with. You know what? I'm happy with both.
Yeah, nothing wrong with being a bit greedy. Thank you very much. And if you haven't left us 1 review yet, well, come on. Some people have done 2. Do please leave us an iTunes review. We really appreciate it. And we will give you your moment of fame by reading it out on the show. Now, before we wrap up this episode, Rob, you want to know how the magician performs his tricks? I'm not sure about this.
So we were putting together our show notes and using one of the resources we've mentioned many times before, Google Docs, which is a live collaborative document, so you can see what the other person's typing. Fantastic for podcasts when you don't do them face-to-face. However, Rob used some dark magic where suddenly he typed a few little letters and all the show notes templates appeared. So before I put the microphone down and ran from a bunker because I realised I'm co-hosting with a witch, luckily I asked Rob, what was that and what did he do?
I prefer wizard, but okay. Okay, this is one of my favourite little geeky tech tricks. The generic name for it is a text expander. So in the show notes, I'll link to the one that I use for Mac, and I'll link to a Windows version as well that I haven't tried out, but I think it's the main one for Windows. What it basically does is gives you custom shortcuts. So you can define a combination of letters, and when you type it, it can fill in anything you want. So I use it for the show notes because we've got a template. So every week we talk about things in a certain order. So I just type a few keys to fire off that template, and it populates the whole thing. It saves copying and pasting it from somewhere else. But you can use it for loads of stuff as well. So I use it, for example, for my phone number and my address. It's the kind of thing that you have to put in all the time. So I've got a combination of a few keys that I type, and it up pops my full address or my full phone number. It saves loads of time when filling in forms. I also use it for account numbers and all kinds of bits that I can't remember and can't be bothered to type. So you could probably see how this could be useful for property addresses and for all sorts. Anything that you find yourself typing over and over again, save yourself the hassle.
Well, now I'm no longer scared. I'll definitely check that one out. Great resource, actually. Very, very impressive. And we hope you'll be impressed with next week's episode. Next week, we're doing something a little bit different, but it certainly applies to property investors, but you can use it in many aspects of your life. And next week, we're looking at a mindset for winning. Mindset is huge to property investment. We've talked about it before, about how people aren't suited, how certain people are. But actually, a mindset for winning is huge. If you don't expect to win and achieve in the things you do, and that includes property investment, then really, you're going to struggle. So next week's episode, for those who are, I'm from the north, I'm tough, mindset for winning, fluffy stuff. I promise you, it's going to be a cracking episode and you'll get loads of value from it. So make sure you join us next week for that one.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to that. The combination of the kind of the technical knowledge that we get from episodes like this combined with the correct mindset. I think it's that combination that you really need to reach your full potential in property or in anything. So that's going to be a really great episode. Until then, we will, of course, be back on Tuesday with Ask Rob and Rob. And do go get yourself booked in for a meetup at thepropertyhub.net/meetups. We'd love to see you there. So one way or another, we'll be seeing you very soon. For now, though, have fun. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to The Property Podcast. For show notes, all our past episodes, and to leave a review, go to thepropertyhub.net/podcast.